Hey everyone, welcome to today's Stage 32 Next Level webinar. My name's Harrison. I am the Director of Education here, and I'm so glad to have everyone here today. This is a cool one. I am so excited that we have with us today Mike Goyo, who you see in front of you, who has been writing for a while now and has been writing on some pretty big shows like Ginny and Georgia, which statistically speaking, it's been so big that I'm sure many of you are fans just by the numbers of how many people watch that show, as well as Insecure on HBO, which I love, and he's worked on Nails on TNT and a lot of shows like that. He has seen writers' rooms, different types of writers' rooms, and knows what it takes, not just to get in one, but to contribute and be a good writer in one. And so I'm excited to dive deep with him into that topic. But before we do that, a few quick things. One, this is a live and interactive webinar, which means you are all going to have the chance to ask any questions you'd like to Mike. And to do that, we'll be using the questions box of your GoToWebinar toolbar. So if you pop out that questions box right now, and let's do a practice round. If you could all pop that out, and in the chat box at the bottom, type in where it is that you are today, where you're tuning in from, what city, what state, what country. We'd love to know who's in the room today. And while you're all doing that, I'll also remind you that we are recording this. So if you missed part of this, if you want to rewatch any of it, it will be in your Stage 32 account in about 24 hours for you to do so. And you get an email when that's the case. So keep a lookout for that. And then we're social here at Stage 32. I hope you are all as well. If you enjoyed today's presentation, if you learned anything, share what you learned, talk about it. Tag us while you're at it. We're at Stage 32 on Twitter and Instagram. Let's see what we have in the room here today, Mike. We got a lot of people. Okay, let's see. Someone from Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, Berlin,
All
UK,
right.
LA, Toronto, Atlanta, New York, Knoxville, San Pedro, Chicago, Hollywood, LA, a lot of LA. We got someone from Paris, someone from New Jersey, Brooklyn,
Paris.
someone from London, it's another LA. We got a lot of LAs actually. Welcome, guys. Well, cool. This seems like a really cool global room. We're glad everyone's here. This is where you'll be typing in questions throughout. We're going to save a lot of the questions for the end, but please type in questions at any point. We're going to be taking some breaks and asking questions as we go. So you can type in questions at any point, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. During the presentation and also at the end. So stay tuned. Have a great time. I'm excited to learn with you, and I'll turn things over to Mike.
Awesome. Thank you, Harrison. First of all, thank you guys for inviting me to lead this webinar. I think that aside from like actually being in a writer's room and, um, trying to create, amazing content, it's also important for a lot of us who are trying to break in and who a lot of us who are trying to stay in the industry learning about ways in which to do that. So I think this is a great topic of discussion because I think there are a lot of more of us that are trying to break in than there are that are already in there. So I'm glad to be able to lead this topic. So how to break in and excel in a TV writer's room. Thank you guys for joining me. So first, Harrison gave a great introduction, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about myself, just to give you guys more of a reference point for how I got started, for how I broke in. So, I'm Haitian. I was born in Haiti, raised in Boston, Massachusetts. Um, like my family first initially moved to a town called Mattapan. Not sure how many of you are familiar with Mattapan, but it's like the Ellis Island for Haitians. Like that's where we all went when we moved to Boston. Lived there for a couple of years. Went to like English as a second language speaking, school. Then 2 years in, we moved into Quincy, Massachusetts, which was predominantly Caucasian, and I was like one of the only Black kids in the class. So I like to say that I learned to hone my fluencies between like Negro and Caucasian very early, and learned to code switch without realizing what code switching was at the time. And then my family moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is where I went to high school. And then later I went to UMass Boston for college. And that's honestly trying to really wrap up the early years here. But yeah, was initially gonna be a doctor, go to med school, do all that, do what my parents wanted me to do. Um, got to college, came across organic chemistry, and then that was it. It was going to be a no for me. So I always grew up writing. I love to write, and always just thought of it as a hobby and not something that I could like tangibly like pursue because I never saw anyone that looked like me, or I never saw like the path to getting there. And for a lot of you, and for a lot of us coming up, that we didn't necessarily see the path to get to where we're going, which is why this topic is so important. Breaking in. How do you break in? You know? And part of the reason why I'm taking you guys through this journey of my early years, because this is like how I broke in. So went to college, changed my major to theater with a concentration in creative writing. I thought I was gonna move to New York, be a playwright, live like a very kind of like bohemian, starving artist lifestyle. I took a production internship my last year of college, working as a PA for Discovery, and discovered that I love TV. I love that medium. So I then decided to move to LA after college to pursue a career in television. Before I moved to LA, I was working as a production assistant in Boston. Like I worked on the Equalizer movie as a production assistant. I worked on a couple of like reality TV gigs. American Idol had come to Boston because Idol does their U.S. tour for auditions, and I was working with them as a production assistant. Just happened to mention, hey, I'm moving to LA in a month, and it's and they were like, oh, well, as soon as you move, come work with us. So the great thing is, as soon as I moved to LA, I had a job. I think some of us are kind of pensive about moving cross country if you're in the US and on the East Coast, or just moving far to a place you've never been before without the financial security of knowing that you're going to be okay. So I was lucky enough I was lucky enough to have a job when I moved to LA. So I started working with American Idol. So You Think You Can Dance was under the same production company banner as American Idol. So when I would work American Idol from fall to spring, I would then hop on So You Think You Can Dance from spring to fall. So I had year-round work, which was, very lucky to have that experience and to have that moment. But what I'll say about that is coming from networking, and we'll be talking about networking in a section of this webinar. But I say all that to say that is networking. That is following up with people. That is building genuine connections with folks that enjoy your time and see your work ethic and want to give you an opportunity. And sometimes it's really just a matter of opening your mouth and letting people know what your aspirations are or what you want for yourself, because most of the time people are going to reach a hand out to help you. And that's really what's happened to me at a lot of points in my career, or me expressing myself to people, telling them, oh, this is what I want to do, and them reaching out a hand if they are capable, or if they can, to help me. So I think that's really important too, just giving voice to the things that you want and forging forward with that in mind and allowing people to help you. So there's that. So I worked in reality TV for a couple of years, and went from a production assistant in reality to a supervising producer in reality TV, which was cool, but that was not the intention. I had moved here to write. What I began to realize is that the reality TV network of people and the scripted TV network of people rarely ever met. So I was making all these inroad in reality and making all these connections in reality, but I wasn't meeting anyone in scripted who could like really give me an opportunity. So I think I was talking to my boss at one point, and I told her, yeah, I moved to LA to write, yada yada yada, and she said, oh, I moved to LA to write too, 25 years ago. And I was like, oh, okay, I have to go. there's something I'm doing wrong here. So I had to take a step back from reality TV, and I took a part-time job at a gym, saved the money that I had made in reality, was trying to write full time, and essentially kind of like started over a little bit, you know? And um, in that time, I met Issa Rae, and she gave me my first writing opportunity on the scripted podcast she was doing called Fruit. Fruit is a audio drama. It's about a sexually fluid football player who's recounting events from his past as it leads up to a scandal. We had 2 seasons of that, and in that time, a friend of mine had sent me an email about claws. Earlier, Harrison said nails, which I thought was funny, but the show is called
That was my
Claws. No, no worries, Harrison. I was like, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. The show is called Claws. It's on TNT. The first season. Well, I'll say this. A friend of mine sent me an email saying, "Hey, this new show is coming out. They are looking for a writer's PA." Mind you, I'm coming from being like a supervising producer. Like I thought I had already kind of made it, and I had to start over. And sometimes it takes a lot of us. We go through our first act, second acts in life, and things like that. And sometimes you're not sure whether or not you can take that leap to start over, or you feel as though you've gotten too far to where you are in your career to have to start over. The fact of the matter is sometimes you just have to start over, and that's really the answer. So I was like, okay, cool. I interviewed for this writer's PA job, got it. Was the writer's PA for season 1, was bumped up to writer's assistant for season 2. By the end of season 2, the showrunner at the time, my boss, Janine Sherman Berrois, had read one of my samples and recommended me to her old manager, who then became my new manager. And that is how I got on the first season of Ginny and Georgia. That's how I got staffed on Ginny and Georgia, was through just, I mean, again, when I talk about work ethic, I will be at some point talking about writing while you're writing, you know what I mean? Like, or working while you're writing, because that's very important. And if I had not had my sample ready for my boss to see when she asked for it, then the opportunity to meet with a rep would not have been there. So I think that's important as well. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that part. Um, but yeah, and then after Ginny and Georgia, full circle moment, Issa Rae and Prentice Penny um, gave me the opportunity to come write on the final season of Insecure. So it's been great. I've been able to develop my own content. I'm in the middle of developing my own content. There's a half-hour dramedy that I co-wrote with Jean Elie, who plays Issa's brother on Insecure. He plays Amal, and we co-wrote something together that we produced and shot a sizzle reel for, and that has found a home, and we will we'll be able to say more on that later on in the year. And yeah, I recently launched a mentorship program, and that is something that I'll also be discussing here. Mentorship program for pre-WGA Black writers who are on the cusp of making it, and how to kind of like give them that additional push across the threshold, as you will. And yeah, so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and get started. I know that we already have some questions coming in, and we will get to that. What I would like to do for this webinar is make it as interactive as possible, because I honestly care more about your questions than I do whatever I'm going to say. I like to rely on Hive Mind, kind of like, to poll everyone in terms of like the type of questions that you ask, because I'm sure one person is going to ask a question that like 30 other people also have the same question and want the answer for. So I really do care about your questions, and we'll try to ask Harrison to allow me to answer a few questions after each slide or before each slide. So let's go ahead. Let's move right into it. All right, different types of different type of writer rooms. Um, One thing that I realized as I began to kind of like really, start working in writers' rooms and like see the different dynamics and how things work, you begin to realize the differences between like a comedy room and a drama room, or a broadcast room versus cable versus streamers, mini rooms versus full order rooms, and I will kind of like go over the difference. There more likely than not, there will be more writers in a comedy room than there will be in a drama room. And that's also depending on whether or not that is broadcast or cable. Like, say, for instance, a broadcast show like, say, Big Bang Theory as a comedy is will have more writers in that room. First of all, the broadcast budget is bananas. It's crazy. But also just in terms of like jokes and punching up jokes and like having a lot of people that are able to like, you know, speak to that or pitch toward that is really important in like a comedy broadcast room. So there tends to be more writers in there, like maybe like 16 or something like that. In a drama room, there tends to be less. There's also this thing about like show orders. Show orders are becoming less and less. Not so much for broadcast. Well, kind of for broadcast. Like for broadcast, it's either like it's like 13 episodes to 23 episodes. But I'd say still right now, broadcast, there's still like 22 episode orders for broadcast. So it really also is determined by like um, how many episode orders you get. But broadcast TV tends to have the 22 episode orders. And I think some streamers are starting to mimic that in a sense. Like, say, for instance, there's a show on Netflix that could be considered a broadcast show because it's like multicam. It's Family Reunion with Loretta Devine. That show comes out in like parts. It's like there's part one, part two, part three, and they kind of release it like that. But by the time you get to part three, it's like, okay, this has been like a 24 episode order. So they kind of like have been able to break it up in that way. So the landscape of TV has honestly truly changed from what it was 10 years ago, from what it was 15 years ago, from what it was 5 years ago. So that just to show you in terms of like what those breakdowns are. If any of you have questions pertaining to the different types of writers' rooms, those questions only, I'll answer that right after I'm through with this slide. But yeah, and then you have mini rooms and you have full order 20 week, 20 plus week rooms where it's kind of like the mini room could be a couple of different things. It could be like a mini room for like a limited series where it's kind of like, okay, well, this is only going to be 6 episodes, so you don't need that much time to kind of like really flesh this out. Or AMC kind of is like really known for mini rooms in terms of like, their shows, because what they'll do is they'll put together a mini room and will allow that room to like, I don't know, write like 3 or 4 episodes. Then, and based on those 3 or 4 episodes, then they'll decide, do we want to pick this show up? Do we want to pick up the series for a full order? And if not, then it's like, okay, whoever's in the room got paid for that, they can go about their business. And if it does end up getting picked up, then it's like, okay, fantastic. Now the whole room can like just come back or continue what they were doing for a full order. Like, I'll give you the example of there's a show called coming out. There's a show coming out that I'm really excited about that is called uh, Kings of Napa. Yes, yes, Kings of Napa. And basically, what happened there is there was a mini room put together to create a certain amount of episodes, say 6 episodes, right? And then based on those 6 episodes, the network decides whether or not they want to pick it up for a full order. And once they decide that, which I mean, it was picked up for a full order, the room then continues to create another 5 episodes, 6 episodes, depending on what the show order ends up becoming, right? And so there are many different. What I'm getting at is that there are many different types of rooms, and it's good to know the difference between each one. Um, the major thing about broadcast versus cable versus streamers is something that I'll also get to later because it kind of affects lower level writers in terms of their experience on set. And I will get to that later. But Harrison, if there are any questions pertaining to the different types of writers' rooms, I'm cool with answering those.
Yeah, there's a few. Sarah wants to know if you can be more specific of how big a mini room normally is. It's like how many people, I guess.
Um, okay, I can do two things. I can speak to my personal experience of being in the writer's room, and I can speak to what some of my friends' rooms have looked like and what I just know in general in terms of rooms, right? So most of the a comedy room will have more writers in it than say a drama room will. A broadcast room will have more writers in it than say a cable room will. And I'll put it like this. On Insecure, we had 14 writers, and that's the biggest room I've been in so far. And that's a comedy room, but it's also a cable room. If that were a comedy room on broadcast, there may even be 16 to 17 writers in there. Like there may be 16 writers in there. Like some may be like writing teams, so that's why it accounts for like the high number. But for the most part, broadcast comedy rooms, I would say, have the most writers in them. That's not to say, oh boy, like I'm gonna go for broadcast comedy because that those my chances would be higher there. We all know how hard it is to get these rooms. Like I'm not gonna sugarcoat it for y'all. It's hard. It's hard. It's even the writer's assistant jobs are like coveted positions. So, but we will continue to talk about how to break into it because even though it is hard, there are ways to break into the room, and I will speak to ways in which to do that. And from what you may have noticed from my background spiel, I got in through being an assistant. So I think I have different slides for that, so we'll get to that part. But my route or the way that I broke in was through being an assistant, and that got me to where I needed to be. But also getting representation helped me a lot too. Did that answer the question,
I think
or
so.
did
Well, I
you
think
want like
Sarah wants to know,
number
she just wrote back, does mini refer to the duration of the room or the number of people in the room? When you talk,
duration?
okay, it's a
So
shorter time period.
it's a shorter room, like say like 6 weeks or something like that. Like full order rooms would be like a 20-week plus. You know what I mean? Like Ginny and Georgia, our room was like 24 weeks. Season 2 will be about the same amount of weeks. And Insecure is usually around 24 weeks as well in terms of duration, but our final season was a little more unique because we were in a pandemic and we were on Zoom. So it took us a little longer to kind of, you know, create the season because we were under an enormous amount of just personal issues, personal pressure. Like we were in a pandemic. It's hard to write in a pandemic and also during like social and racial and political upheaval. Like it's hard. But yeah, it's mini rooms are about the duration of the room and not so much about how many people are in there. But also, mini rooms will have less people in there. Like you're not going to find 14 people in a mini room. Maybe like 6 to 9, 6 to 10, maybe. But yeah, mini rooms speak to duration and speak to the amount of people in that room because those are generally smaller rooms.
Awesome. And then one last question. Let's see. Alexander wants to know, and you might speak to this more, Mike, when we go into like a day in the life of a writer's room. But what's the difference in how a comedy room actually interacts with one another compared to a drama room? Are they the same?
That's a good question. They can be. Like you mentioned, Harrison, I later on I do talk about the DNA of a writer's room. And the DNA, like when I say DNA, I mean like how the room operates. And each room, no matter comedy or drama, like if you're hopping from comedy to comedy to comedy or drama to drama or like then comedy to drama, whatever it is, each room has its own DNA. It functions differently. It functions based on the dynamic of the people in that room, and that's why it's so important as a writer to be personable, because a lot of it, beyond having great ideas and knowing how to pitch, it is knowing how to interact with people, knowing how to respond and or react to people, and learning how to get along. So I'll say that like the comedy and drama rooms are fairly different. Like a comedy room, of course, it's like lightness and it's like you're joking around, and it could be more feel more fun. Just the term, depending on the type of person that you are. If you're a comedy writer and you're in a drama room and we're sitting, like, say you're on like I don't know, Law and Order SVU, and it's like, okay, this is like this is this is kind of like an emotional drag as a comedy writer. Yeah, of course you might feel that way, and a comedy room is more suited for you. But honestly, like beyond it being a comedy or drama room, it's really based on the people in the room and whether or not you get along with them and whether or not you genuinely like them is very important. But I'd say, yeah, comedy room, you're joking all the time. That's what it's about. You're like punching up jokes and you're pitching jokes and you're being funny and it's light. It feels more light. But sometimes drama rooms can be like that too, where it's kind of like, okay, guys, like let's lighten this up a bit and not be so um, not lean too much into the drama, because that could be a little depressing sometimes too. And I'm not talking about leaning into the drama in terms of pitching. I'm talking about like a day of pitching, just like tough things, and it's like, okay, the showrunner might be like, let's make things make things a little light just to brighten up the room, just to make people feel a little more like upbeat. You know, it's really based on your showrunners. It's based on the people that are in the room and whether or not you genuinely enjoy being in their space.
Yeah, awesome. There are more questions, but I think I'm going to save some of these for later because they don't quite fit into what we're talking about now. But I'm seeing everyone's questions. Great questions, everyone. Keep on writing them down, and I'm keeping track of them all.
All right, fantastic. We will move to the next slide. All right, the main roles and hierarchies of a writer's room. Sometimes people aren't quite sure of what the hierarchy is, and not to say like hierarchy based on like who's the more powerful person in the room or who could speak or who's not supposed to speak. I'm more so talking about like position, like what you might be doing or what might be expected of you to do, and or I mean clearly pay. Like who's getting paid the most. I'll start with the assistants. So just in terms of hierarchy of assistants, you have the writer's production assistant, which I'd say in the past year has been kind of like omitted, only because like writers production assistants are meant to do runs. They're meant to go get lunch. They're meant to like do whatever like the showrunner needs in terms of like, oh, go get this for me, go get this, like make sure we have enough supplies in the writer's room, things like that. But since we have gone virtual this past year, that particular position, um I mean, we didn't have a writer's production assistant on Insecure this past season because we're on Zoom. There was no need to go fetch lunch or to go do any of that. So there wasn't much of a need for one. And then these next few are kind of like interchangeable in terms of like where they fall in the hierarchy in the grand scheme of things. You have your script coordinator. Usually, the script coordinator is like in the room as well and like making sure are able to provide their input. Writer's assistant, of course, taking notes in the room. Sometimes when you are group writing, the writer's assistant or the script coordinator will write the script while everyone is like dictating what they should be writing. That's one thing I did not add to this group writing versus like having a writer go off and write their individual episode. I can speak to that later when we get to the actual writer's room, because I think that's something too that generally some up and coming writers who are trying to break in, who are trying to excel in the room don't know that sometimes a room will group write an episode, meaning that like the writer's assistant or the script coordinator will be on final draft. The screen, will go up on a TV or something where everyone can see, and there will be a blank page, and using the outline that has already been created, the entire room will then write the episode together. That happens. And there are also situations and more traditional where it's like the writer who's assigned that episode will write their outline, get notes from the room on their outline, go off and write the first draft of their episode, and then on and on and on until they have a production draft, and then they'll go, shoot that draft. There are other instances where, a writer will write their outline, they'll write the first draft, get notes on the first draft, and depending on the type of show that you're on or the type of showrunner or creator that you have on that show, they may then take your first draft and then go write the next draft or rewrite it and then write it till production. It's really, like I said, each room is based on the DNA of that specific room. So there's not really one way to do things. But back to this hierarchy list. So writer's production assistant is like lowest rung. Script coordinator, writer's assistant, showrunner's assistant are kind of like around the same place. But when you're an assistant in those positions, the position that I would want, or that would be the most important to me, would be writer's assistant, because then I'm in the room. I get to have input. If you have a great boss who allows you to pitch, I get input in the room, and there's a potential for me to get a co-writing episode. There might be an opportunity for me to get to co-write an episode based on the showrunner, or the creator, or the room, and like potentially having that opportunity. I put a researcher in there. Generally, some rooms don't have researchers, or they'll just have the writer's assistant look up whatever and have it prepared for the next day, or the showrunner's assistant might be asked by the showrunner to look up some things for the room and things like that. But then there are times where, say, like a show like Law and Order SVU or something, or a show that's like heavily kind of like topical based, just on things that are going on in the world, might have a dedicate or allocate money for the room to have a person who just does research, who is a researcher. And I would say those are the law shows, medical shows, things like that may have like a researcher who's meant to just do that. Now, getting to the writers, when someone says you are staffed, they're talking about from staff writer on. They're not talking about like any of the assistant levels. They're talking about, oh, you got staffed. So when you are first staff, you start at staff writer level. Then there's story editor, then executive story editor, then co-producer, then producer, then supervising producer, then co-executive producer, and then there's like creator, showrunner, EP, like based on like who's in the room and like who created the show, right? Sometimes the showrunner created the show. Staff writer, story editor, executive story editor are known as lower level writers. I hate that term. I hate the term lower level writer. I hate the term baby writer. It's kind of like, what? I can be a lower level writer today and be a showrunner tomorrow. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, there we are. There you have it. Lower level writers, staff writer, story editor, executive story editor. Co-producer, producer, supervisor, producer are mid-level writers. So that's what, like, when they say we're looking for a lower level writer, they mean staff writer, story editor, executive producer. When they say mid-level, we're looking for a mid-level writer or upper level writer, they mean co-producer, producer, supervisor, producer, co-EP. Like, that's what they mean. Like, when you hear back from your manager, you hear back, or you hear like certain job postings that say we're looking for a mid-level writer, like they're talking about that hierarchy. They're talking about this list right here in terms of like where you fall. Now, function in the writer's room in terms of all of these, like if you're a new staff writer in the room and Now we're talking about after you've broken in, right? And we're talking about excelling. Like, how do you continue to excel in the room? And honestly, get invited back for the next year and or find another staff writing gig or story editor gig, for your next show, right? You as a staff writer, and I'm talking now like if we were in the traditional room and not on Zoom like we have been, like if like as a staff writer, I'd be like, okay, your job is to be a wealth of stories. Like you're being hired for your stories. Because the thing is, you're not necessarily being hired for your writing experience per se, because you're new, you're fresh, you're just getting in there. But what your showrunner is looking to you for, or the other writers in the room are looking to you for your experience, for your wealth of experience. This is why you can't just apply, or you can't just be interviewed or go for any type of show. You have to go for a show that's kind of like speaks to who you are as a person, because then you'll have the better chance of like getting in there. Do you know what I mean? Like say for instance, a show like Ginny and Georgia. It's set in Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts. I know Massachusetts. I know these people. I know like I grew up with them. I know where it's set. You know what I mean? It's kind of like based on like Newton, Massachusetts, which is like, oh, I know Newton. You know, it's about mother and daughter. It's about a mother who'll do anything for her kids. Like I grew up with a mother who would do anything. Like all of our mothers would do anything for us. But I'm talking about like my mother would scam for me. Like you know what I mean? Like my mother is a world class scammer. Like things like that. Things usually when you're going into a writer's room for the first time, like when you're being interviewed, they're asking you things for your stories. They're asking for your stories and like what you can bring to the writers room in terms of just like creating stories, and they kind of like really rely on staff writers and lower level writers to be like, okay, well, yeah, tell me more about yourself. Like, tell me a story of yada 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 that happened to you in high school, because more likely than not, that'll end up on the show. You know, so staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, they're looking for your wealth of stories. When you get to like story editor, executive producer, that's when you have more experience in just terms of like how to pitch, structure, like what goes where, and things like that. Staff writer, if you're in the room, you might be the person that's writing on the board. Like they're gonna look to the lowest person, like the lowest level person in the room, be like, hey, your time to write on this board, and that's just like you need to be looking for anything that you can do in order to make yourself valuable, so that you can stay there and that you can continue to excel in the room. You know what I mean? So learning how to pitch is a section that I have, I think, later on, but just in terms of hierarchy, that's how that works. Creator, I'll share like a tidbit about creator for you, and just in terms of contracts, because contracts is another thing that I talk about later. I have creator at the top here, next to showrunner and EP, which is where the creator should be. But one thing that all of you need to be careful about, and this I'm going to talk about contracts, I'm going to talk about having a fantastic lawyer and all that. There are some creators of shows that come onto their own show as like a consulting producer or like a supervising producer or a producer. And it's like, no, you should be a co-executive producer on your show at least. But there are networks or that may, or business affairs at networks that might be like, even though you created the show, we want to offer you co-producer on your own show. So that's a no. And I encourage everyone to fight that and have a fantastic lawyer who'll be like, at least get you co-executive producer on your own show. But yeah, so I would say generally watch out for that. But yes, this is the hierarchy. Are there any questions pertaining to anything that I've just said, or the hierarchy of?
I got a few questions that I think are really good. Maximilian asks, what's the skill set of a story editor? Do they track character arcs and episodes and make sure continuity or emotional logic works? And do they have assistants?
Yes. Well, do they have assistants, like personal assistants, or do they have assistants in doing that job?
I don't know. I think either way.
Okay. No, they don't have personal assistants. No one here, none of these writers here have personal assistants, but the showrunner. The showrunner has the showrunner's assistant. The writers in the room get assisted by the writer's assistant. They all share that person, but they don't have like personal assistants. Assistance in terms of like tracking story, yes, all the writers in the room should be tracking story. Sometimes the upper levels or the showrunner or whoever isn't necessarily thinking about that at the time. So if you personally want to be that person that is tracking story, that is tracking, say, like on a crime show, you're tracking the money, or you're tracking, or something is being pitched and it's like, oh, they're forgetting about this one thing or this one beat that is missing from this, but you're the person that's been tracking it the whole time. That's important. You want to, either whether you're a staff writer, story editor, or executive story editor, if you have that skill where you can track an arc, and as things are being pitched, you can be like, oh, hey, I don't think that's going to work because of this, this, and this. Or, hey, I think that would be fantastic, and then dovetail it back into why it would be fantastic. It'd be like, because I've been following and tracking this particular arc, and that would be fantastic for this arc. So if you have that, if you can be valuable in that way in the room, that's fantastic. Like, find the thing that you're good at. Find the thing that you're good at, and find the reason for you to be kept in the room. Like, whenever the showrunner or the like they don't want to be thinking about everything. So that's why there's an entire room of people to help you, to help that showrunner, creator, or EP, or whoever think about everything else. So if you can take that upon yourself to be that person that's tracking a certain story or tracking certain things that the rest of the room may not be thinking about, latch on to that. Yes, continue to do that because you will be valuable.
Awesome. And then I imagine the answers might vary here, but Chris wants to know how long it often takes for a staff to become a staff writer from being an assistant. How long are you an assistant normally before you get that next opportunity?
That is a really good question. Okay. So I've come across people that have been writer's assistants for like 5 or 6 seasons on the show, or something, or they've been a writer's assistant forever. And I personally don't understand that. I don't get it. I don't know why you did not leave. I don't know why you were stuck in that space for as long as you were. Like, I'd have to sit and individually speak to those people to be like, so what what happened? Like, why are you still an assistant, and why haven't you been moved up? There are many reasons as to why an assistant may not be moved up in the room. Sometimes you are too good at your job, and the showrunner does not want to lose you as an assistant because it's like, what, I will never find another assistant like you, so I'm going to keep you as an assistant because I'm juggling too many things, and the last thing I want is a subpar writer's assistant when I have such a great one. So you also want to be careful about there's a fine line that you have to kind of like walk between being a really good assistant and being good enough to just then move on to being staff. Like, you have there's there's a fine line you have to walk because depending on like the showrunner or depending on who your boss is, they might be like, damn, you're just so great as my assistant. Like, I may not find another great assistant like you. So I'm just gonna keep you as my assistant. And you personally, as the person who is the assistant, if you choose to then stay in that position because you are fearful that you will not get in another room, then that is your decision. But me, I am the type of person where I'm like, okay, I was a writer's assistant for a season, time to move on. Like, I'm that person. So here's my thing. My thing is this: if you feel as though that is your one opportunity, where I'm just gonna remain in this room until they staff me, or until the showrunner, refers me somewhere, or until I get staffed on a show. Fantastic. You can do that. But then there are also other people that are just kind of like, if they've been on a show as a writer's assistant for a couple of seasons and don't see upward mobility on that show, they will leave. So my advice to any of you is, if you feel as though you have been in a writer's room as an assistant for too long and you don't see upward mobility on the horizon, you may need to leave. Like, you may need to pursue another show, go somewhere else. That's ultimately what I did on Claws. Not to say that, like, Claws was fantastic. Loved my boss on Claws. Loved all of that. Like, everyone was great. But for me, it was one of those things where it was just kind of like, okay, I think I can move on from this. I want to move up. I don't necessarily see upward mobility here. Not as if like they weren't trying to staff me, but it's more so like thing just thinking about, you have to also think about the politics of being in a writer's room. Like, sometimes, different decisions have to be made and it's not personal. So if you don't necessarily see upward mobility for yourself in a writer's room, it may be time to go. It may be time to figure out something else. I ended up leaving Claws, um, and just made that decision for myself, because I was just kind of like, okay, like, there doesn't seem to be upward mobility here, and I could just as easily be writing while my manager and myself, because I do believe that, like, even though you have a manager, you can't rely on your manager to find you work. You have to. They only get 10%. So my thing is, I always think of it as like, oh, okay, my reps get 10% of whatever I make. I need to be doing 90% of the work. Like, that's just my thinking. So never just rely on your manager to find you work, because you should not be doing that. But anyway, I made the decision to leave Claws, and a few months after that, I got staffed on Ginny in Georgia. So it's really like, do what's best for you, do what's best in terms of what feeds your soul. But I think your original question was, how long are you an assistant before you get staffed? That varies depending on several different factors, depending on the makeup of the writer's room, depending on the politics of the room, depending on you as a person and whether or not you choose to stay in that position. Are you asking about staffing opportunities there, or are you just waiting to be offered something? Like, what are you personally doing to keep you as a writer's assistant and not moving you up? Like, you know what I mean? And like I said earlier, you have to tell people what it is that you want, because generally and often people want to help. So if you're not speaking what you want into existence, then it's not going to happen. You're just going to remain a writer's assistant. So that's my roundabout way of saying, you can be a writer's assistant for a season that gets staffed, or you can be a writer's assistant for 8 years and get staffed or not. Right, exactly. So it's really dependent on you as the individual.
Great. A couple more quick questions before we move on. Can you talk more about the actual difference between what a writer and a story editor is, and then what's the difference between a story editor and an executive story editor?
You know what? There isn't much of a difference. It's money, cash, like what you're getting paid. Like, there isn't really much of a difference. I will say, like, a staff. Oh, okay. I'll say this. Staff writers don't get paid for their episodes if they get an episode. If you get an episode as a staff writer, generally, unless it's worked into your contract by an amazing lawyer, most of the time, and I'm saying 99.9% of the time, staff writers aren't getting paid for episodes of TV that they write. Sometimes that's part of the reason why they don't get an episode. They are paid, and mind you, it's still a lovely jump from assistant to staff writer. It's a life-changing jump. And you get paid weekly. You get a weekly rate for your services, but you are not getting paid for an episode. You'll be accredited for it, and then you'll get the residuals for that episode if you were to get an episode, but you're not getting a fee for that episode. That's staff writer. Story editor is when you start getting fees for your episodes. you start getting paid for whatever episode you're writing or solo writing or whatever that is. And also getting your weekly rate to be in the writer's room. Executive story editor, again, it's another it's a title bump and it's a financial bump. Like, you're getting financial bumps all the way throughout this hierarchy. You're getting bumped up money wise. So I would say the difference between staff writer and story editor is definitely getting paid for an episode. You don't get paid for episodes till you get to story editor level. And then after that, it's like, the pay bumps that occur throughout that hierarchy.
Awesome. And then who, let's see. Ginger wants to know who makes the decisions to promote writers to, well, assistants to writers and writers to story editors. Is it the showrunner or the network or someone else?
That's a great question. And I think I speak to that in a different slide, but I can answer that now. It's based on your contract. Like, I'll give you an example. My contract for Ginny and Georgia was a 3-year contract, meaning first year I would be staff writer, second year I would be a story editor, third year I would be an executive story editor. So I would get a bump each time. But then after Ginny and Georgia, I was staffed on Insecure as a story editor. So then if I intended to go back to Ginny and Georgia, there you can, go back and try to renegotiate and say, hey, so I was just a story editor on Insecure, so can we negotiate me being bumped to executive story editor because I've already done story editor. Like, that's a conversation to be had. Whether or not business affairs and that show allows you to do that, that's another conversation that is had with your attorney and everyone involved and business affairs and things like that. But for the most part, like, it's all contractually based. Now, you can still have a contract for 3 years and still not be invited back the next season. Like, it will say in your contract that, like, they'll option you for the second season or something like that, meaning that, like, they have the right to either say yes or no to you coming back. And like I said, in terms of, that's why we have excelling in the room as one of these, as part of this webinar, is because once you're in the room, you want to be able to stay in a room. You want to make sure that your showrunner sees and knows that you are valuable. You're valuable to the space. You're valuable to what's going on, to what's being pitched. You're valuable to, like, just even, like, the soul of the writer's room. Like, you're that person that makes everyone, like, feel good about themselves. Or, like, you're the person that's like, oh, like, Mike is hilarious and always keeps us laughing. Like it's always about the dynamic of the room and what each person adds to that dynamic to make it fun, to make it, easy, And if the showrunners are very conscious of different people's roles in the room and who they would like to see return. So you want to be a great, positive, presence in the room and, really show your how valuable you are. So yeah.
Awesome. One more question before. Yeah, I think that was great. But one more question before we move on, from Kasturi, who asked, what did the writer's room workload look like for you in the writing room and on set? And where did you learn how to do the job, like script notating and the other technical things, without having done it already?
I have to say that one more time.
All right, yeah. What did the writer's assistant workload look like for you in the writing room? And where did you learn how to do that job, like technically, script notating, etc., without having done it already?
Okay, good question. Okay, so a writer's assistant in the room will typically take notes. Like, I'll say in, like, the first week or two, if your showrunner wants to do this, you may get an opportunity to sit with your showrunner, and then your showrunner will tell you how they like their notes. Do you know what I mean? Because for the most part, I will tell you this: most of the writers aren't reading these notes. Okay, like, most of the writers aren't going to read the notes till they get to their episode, and they're like, "Oh, can you send me the notes?" Yeah. So it's like they're not going home to read the notes like that. The person that will read the notes more often than not to see if you're doing it in the way that they would like is the showrunner, the creator, the EP, because they're helming the ship, so they have to make sure that like they're on the right track. So in each instance that I've been in a room, the showrunner has within the first week sat down with the writer's assistant to be like, hey, this is how I like the notes. This is what I want to see. You can omit this, omit that, omit that. Like I generally just want to see the beats. Like they'll tell you like how they like their notes or whatever. And I learned how to be a writer's assistant from being a writer's production assistant and then seeing how the writer's assistant on the show that I was on did it. You know what I mean? So it's really about like if you have the opportunity to be a writer's production assistant, soak that in as much as possible. Try to sit in the writer's room as much as possible and see how the writer's assistant is doing it. Because then it's like, okay, well, I mean, if this person's not coming back next season, then I'm gonna jump right into that spot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you always want to be thinking about like ways in which you are able to move up and like, you know, taking in like tidbits of information that'll help you later on, so that you could be like, hey, I can do that job, because you've seen it done before and you've been paying attention. Now, if you are coming into a show as a writer's assistant who's never been in a room before, it's a little tougher because here's the thing. It's hard to get into a writer's room. We all know this. Writer's assistant positions are highly coveted positions. Sometimes it's who you know. It's like, okay, the showrunner will hire someone that they've known for a long time to finally give them an opportunity, having known that they've never been a writer's assistant before. Or they will want an experienced writer's assistant who's done the job before, who just hasn't had the opportunity to get staffed yet. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things. But in terms of like how I learned to be a writer's assistant, by watching the writer's assistants I've seen before me do the job, and also it's a lot of on the job learning. And you know, the showrunner will generally pull you aside within the first week and be like, okay, this is how I like my notes, this is how I like it done, so on and so on. In terms of the job itself, the writer's assistant is taking notes, like what everyone is saying in the room, whether jokes are being pitched. If they land on a pitch or something that they really like hone in on that. You need to make sure you're writing that down so that it's like, okay, they've landed on this. They seem to really like this pitch. I need to make sure this is in the notes. When they start blue skying, and blue skying, I think we'll talk about that later in terms of like the day to day of being in a writer's room. But like if they start outlining, you should generally you're told how by the showrunner. You're told how to structure that. You're told how to structure beats. When if you're in a writer's room and you're not told how to do that, and you are coming in having to know how to already do that, there are, reach out to friends who've done it before. But if you don't have those friends who've done it before, I would say this: you need to structure it. Usually we're using like Google Docs or something. You need to structure it like an outline. You have a table of contents at the beginning of your notes where it's easy to find things, and you could, if the showrunner is looking for something, or if another writer in the room is looking for something, they can go directly to that page instead of reading through all this stuff. You need to make sure it's organized. Like the pictures are here. At one point we were talking about this particular character. These characters' beats are here. Character's name on table of contents on page so and so. Like you need to make it as organized and readable as possible, so that the showrunner isn't just looking for stuff at the end of a long writing room day and being frustrated because they can't find that one pitch that someone thought of in the room. Like you need to have it as meticulously organized as possible. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I guess we can move on to the next slide. Or is there another question?
Nope. Let's move on.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see. All right, breaking into a writer's room. Earlier, I talked about like my personal story and the way that happened for me. I went through the assistant track, and then my boss recommended me to her old manager, got a manager, then I got staff on Jenny and Georgia. So, like we're talking about, there are many different ways to get into a room. Fellowships are a great way to get into the room. ABC has one, NBC has one, CBS has one. There's HBO Access. Like there are many different networks have their own programs in place that have money allocated specifically for up and coming writers or staff writers to be present in the room. Now, I have my own personal feelings about fellowships. We're not going to get into that because I did like fellowship season 1, got rejected from all of them. It was like, okay, I'm not doing this again. Like it was a little traumatizing for me, and it was just a lot of like work just to. Anyway, we're gonna push on through that, and then there's the assistant track, which is the track that I went through. We talked. Someone asked earlier about like how long you were an assistant before you got staff. I told you my answer there. It's based on like you as a person. It's based on the politics in the room. It's based on like several different factors on whether or not you're going to get bumped up. But at the end of the day, you need to take control over your own career and figure out a way in which for you to get to the next level. There are competitions that take place, and generally the competitions get you representation. Like there's competitions, tracking board. There's there's like, I mean, you could look up there's so many competitions. ABFF has a competition, a contest. Austin Film Festival has the contest. Like ATX has, like all these places have contests that if you win or if you get really far in, can get you representation. And it's all because of like buzz. Nowadays, agents and managers, they want you to come in having already had some level of buzz around you. And that annoys me a little bit because it's like, well, isn't that your job to like build buzz around me? But nowadays it's like agents and managers, like you are meant to managers are meant to develop you as a writer, and agents are the ones meant to like get you work. Nowadays, like that dynamic is like changing or interchangeable. But both agents and managers nowadays want you to come in packaged as a fully formed person, and it's kind of like, wait, but like you're supposed to help me grow. You're supposed to help package me to make me look presentable or attractive to a writer's room, So it's here's what I'll say about this. Each of you need to be your own cheerleaders. You need to be your own manager and agent. You need to be your own PR person. You need to be your own social media manager. Like you need to do these things for yourself. Because at the end of the day, no one's going to you're going to be at the helm of your own career. You are at the helm of your own career. So you can't rely on agents and managers to do that work for you. That's why I like to say that like because a manager or an agent or whoever gets 10%, I think of it as they are doing 10% of the work. And I am okay with doing 90% of the work because at the end of the day, it is my career. It's not theirs. And I need to be at the helm of my own career. So it's very important for all of you to take that away with you in terms of like, if there's any frustration that you may have about not having manager or not having representation, I like to say that like everything comes in its own time. But while you're on the road to having representation, be your own representation. Like continue to network, meet people, mingle, meet other writers, meet showrunners, network with people, build genuine, valuable connections with people, and not out of a place of like just wanting to be helped by them, but out of a place of genuinely liking them. You know what I mean? If the people that you genuinely like to be around and enjoy their space, that you'll be gravitated to, and vice versa. They'll gravitate towards you and be like, hey, I remember Mike and so and so. Like, yeah, come on. Like, I have this writer's assistant position open. Like, would you like to be like do this, or like oh, I have like some shows coming up. Like, would you be interested in like being in the room? Like, those are how those things happen. Like, those connections happen. Like, I'll give you an example about Issa. When I first met Issa, it was because of a mixer she was having for creatives. In order to get into the mixer, this is why I'm always talking about be prepared, like be ready, having material, always be writing, always be writing. Because she had posted something on her social media where she was kind of like, hey, having a mixer, in order to get into the mixer, please submit a sample of yours, whether it's a short or whatever it is. And if we like it, that'll be your entry into the mixer. So I had written like this short, it was like I don't know. I think the short was like about like a grinder date gone bad or something like that. Anyway, I had written this short, and it got me into the mixer. Got to meet Issa for all of 2 minutes, 2 minutes. But in those 2 minutes, I remember I made her laugh. So I was like, okay, she might remember me because I made her laugh. And maybe a few weeks later, she had sent out an email to all the writer creatives from that group saying, hey, I'm doing this equal work for equal pay campaign for women's rights. We're going to be doing like a mini short for it, and I'll be putting together a mini writer's room for said short. Please submit your material to see whether or not, we'd like you to join this mini writer's room. I submitted my material, didn't get in. Like, I didn't get into the mini room. But I followed up and said, hey, glad for everyone who got into this room. If you happen to need a PA for free on set that day for this shoot, or a PA for this shoot, I'd be glad to help. And she emailed me back, and she had forwarded my email to her producing partner, Denise Davis, who then hit me up and said, hey, yeah, sure, we'd love a helping hand. Come be a PA for the day. Didn't expect anything out of it, like didn't expect to get paid. I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to be on set and like learn how things went and like, give my time. They ended up paying me for that day, which I greatly appreciated because, we're starving artists at the time. And got more time, more FaceTime with her to talk to her. And by that time, I had written something that had gotten into the Austin Film Festival. Like, I was a second rounder, and I told her, and she was going to be in Austin that year as a panelist. So I said, hey, you are going to be a panelist at Austin this year, and I happen to get in, as a second rounder for something I submitted. And that, I think I said something like, we should carpool to Austin. She said no. I mean, she was like no. She was not about that. But we met again when Austin came around. We met again in Austin. We had drinks, and by that time, Insecure had been picked up to series. And I think I remember asking her if she needed an assistant, but she was completely staffed up for the room by then. But a week after having drinks, she emailed me. She said, hey, so I'm putting together this mini room for this audio drama podcast that I'm doing called Fruit. Would you like to come in to interview for this? And I said, yes, I would. So this long story is all to say, you need to follow up. You need to be your own representation. You need to like learn to do things for yourself. If you want it, you have to go after it, but you have to do it in a way that is genuine, charming. Like, you have to enjoy that person's time and enjoy what that person has done and do it out of a place of like, I genuinely want to work with you because I vibe with you and you're like an awesome person, instead of being like, oh, I just so desperately want a job that I will work for an asshole. I'll work for with people that I don't like in order to do it. Don't do that, because I mean, actually, I won't discourage you from doing it, but I'll just say be careful about doing that, because often, more times than not, that leads to nowhere. And you want to be able to protect your own peace by working with people that you actually like, you actually want to be around. And look, full circle moment, end up on the final season of Insecure. So you have to start planting those seeds for yourself in order to get to the place that you want to be. So just everyone, please keep that in mind. So I think that covers up the working with agents part, I think. Okay, can you find an in without a rep? Yes, you can. Based on the story I just told, yes, you can find ins without a rep. You just have to like know how to work your connections, learning how to follow up, learning how to hit up people, but not doing it in a creepy way where you're like sliding into their DMs and you're just like, you don't know me, but like find find ways to do it that feels a little bit more like genuine and charming and with like a kind of like a lightness that doesn't feel stalkery. Um, and in any opportunity in which you can find to do that, do it. What to expect when working with an agent or manager? Expect that they're not going to do everything for you. Like I said earlier, like you need to be at the helm of your own business, of your own career, and you can't rely on your agent and or manager to do everything for you. Like you need to kind of like take leaps for yourself. Start like take initiative and do things for yourself. I have been in situations with my agents and managers where I'm reaching out to them and be like, hey, I spoke to this person. We're going to have a general. Can you go ahead and schedule it? Like, I've contacted them about things that, like, I'm like, oh, I've already networked with these executives or these people based on, like, certain events or based on, like, me building a relationship with them. And then being like, hey, we've never met for a general, have we? And it's like, oh, yeah, we haven't. And I would connect them with my agent and be like, hey, would you mind setting up this general? Like, do the work. Don't expect your agents and or manager to do it all for you. Um, you know, be at the helm of your career. I keep saying that, but it's true. You have to do that. Mentorship programs. Mentorship programs are important. I feel like there are a lot of mentorship programs coming up. Lena Waithe has a mentorship program. Amy Aniobi has a mentorship program. I, as of this year, launched a mentorship program at the top of the year for up and coming pre-WGA Black writers. I work within that space because that's the space I know. And I like to work with marginalized individuals. That is just a part of me. But yeah, there are plenty of mentorship programs out there. If you don't find a mentorship program, or there are plenty of people that can mentor you. Like find your mentor. Like generally, I wouldn't say go up to like an established writer and be like, "Will you be my mentor?" Because it's like that's a weird question. Like I wouldn't go asking that. But I would say find someone that you really enjoy their writing, you love what they do, you want to emulate their career, you want your path to be similar to theirs, and be like, hey, would you be down for like a informational or a coffee or something, and start building on that relationship. Being like, hey, would you mind reading like this like sample I have or something? Like, I wouldn't even mind if you only read the first 15 pages. I really just want to see if I'm on the right track or something. Like, start building that relationship with that person, and then they will naturally take on that mentorship role and mentee mentor role and help you and like continue to kind of like mine that relationship, and eventually you'll get to where you want to be. Networking to find opportunities. I mean, I've talked about networking throughout. Being an intentional networker is important, and I'll say that when I was in reality, I ended up in reality for 2.5 years because I wasn't networking intentionally. I was just working. I was just networking. So network with intention. If you are a drama writer, network with other drama writers. If you like procedural, find other writers who do procedural and network with them. Like be intentional about your networking so that it helps you kind of like shape the direction that you want to go in, So I'll say that. And quality over quantity. Don't just start networking with anybody and everybody. Like that's not going to get you anywhere. Like that goes along with networking, being intentional about your networking. I'm the type of person, if I go to a networking event, I'm not going to be like, oh my God, I need to meet as many people as possible. I need to get as many cards as possible so I can respond, yada, yada, yada. I'm the type of person, I'll talk to 1 or 2 people the whole night and be cool with that because I am genuinely enjoying the conversation, enjoying their time, getting to know them, having fun. Like I don't feel like I need to at a networking event talk to 300 people and like try to spread my web as much as possible just to come out with like 1,000 business cards. Like, no, that's not the point. The point is to meet the type of people that you enjoy being around, find out what they do, network with them. If they genuinely enjoy being around you as well, is a good thing, and start to mine that relationship. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and get to where it is you want to be. Like, it's quality of relationship over the quantity of the relationships, I would say. How to build a genuine connection. I mean, we all know how to build a genuine connection. Build it with someone that you actually like. Build it with someone that you actually find interesting, that you like being around. If you are networking with someone and you are excited to meet them, and then you're talking to them and you find that like, oh, like you're not cool. Like you're not cool, but you're like not you're kind of an asshole. Or like you're not what I expected, or you're not like I don't think I really like you. Then stop networking with that person. Don't hit them up or expect them to like get you a job. I mean, that's how I am. Like people are different. Like if that asshole comes to you later and is like, oh, this writer's assistant gig, take the gig. But I'm just saying, like generally, you want to try to make connections with people that you like because A, you'll be happier for it, and B, because they like you, there'll be more of an incentive to help you or help each other. So be mindful of that. Just make genuine connections with folks. Are there any questions on this page?
I have a couple really quick questions, but first, Mike, I just want to say so far, you're talking so casually, but the wisdom you just put in that one slide, I think is so fantastic. And I wish, I don't think I've ever heard it put that well before. So I hope people take notice to what you're talking about when you're speaking about networking and finding connections, because that was just really well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, two quick questions that I think are really good. Let me make sure I can find them. This is a few people have been asking this. Is it possible or common to find an opportunity without an agent or manager, but just through your attorney or your lawyer?
Yes. And the reason I said yes so quickly is because when I was on Ginny and Georgia, the other staff writer, I hope she doesn't, I don't think she'll mind me saying this. Bree is, I mean, she might be the exception to the rule. She's brilliant, Harvard graduate. Like Bree is brilliant. Like anyone would be happy to have her in the room. Like I'm talking about like sitting there, she's pitching, just staring in awe, like, oh my God, she's amazing. But when I was staffed, because my manager also already managed the showrunner, and they already kind of had a relationship, and he really pushed for me. But also beyond that, like my interviews were like, oh my God, like my interviews were great. So it's kind of like you have to work together. You can't rely on your agent or your manager to do everything for you. Once you get the interview, that is your time to shine. Like you need to shine. Like you need to, and I was contacting mutual friends, and I was contacting mutual people that like the showrunner knew or the creator knew, to be like, hey, put in a good word for me. Things like you need to, beyond what your manager can do in terms of like getting you in the room, how you stay in the room. You need to be thinking about all of that, how you stay in the room. But back to your question, yeah, you can get into a room with just a lawyer or something like that. I believe Bree, when she got staffed on Ginny and Georgia for season 1, only had an attorney, and her way of getting to the room, or at least getting an interview, was based on like networking and connection. So then all goes back to networking. It all goes back to that. Like it all goes back to being your own agent and being your own manager. Like she was doing that work, and just happened to kind of like be brought up. Someone brought her up to the showrunner and the creator, and was like, hey, you need to meet with this person. Like someone had put in a good word for her. And again, like building those genuine connections where people actually want to help you. They see your talent and they're like, I'm gonna reach out and do this for you because I believe in you. Like, continue to mine those relationships with people that genuinely care about your career. And that's what happened with Bree. It's like, oh, someone recommended her. She interviewed. She only had a lawyer at the time or something like that, and she got the job. So the answer is yes. You can
Awesome.
get into a room without reps.
Awesome. And then can you speak to what kind of samples are good to give to people when you're trying to get into a room? Are you looking for specs or original work, or what do people normally look for?
Original. Original. Nowadays, it's right. Listen, I've only ever written one spec, and it was a Broad City spec, and I only wrote it because, like I said earlier, I did like one season of like fellowships, and then for fellowships you have to have a spec. So I wrote the Broad City spec, and that's the one spec I've ever written in my life. Everything else is original because people want to hear your voice. People want to hear your original voice and how your original voice and what you've written in the world that you've created, how that relates to whatever they are making. So I'll say that like when interviewing for to be staffed in a room, or when writers are looking, or when showrunners or creators and executives and so on are looking for writers to be in a room, they're reading original work because they want to hear your voice, what your voice is. So yeah, original
Awesome.
over spec nowadays. But what I will say is I've heard this before. I have been in panels before with showrunners that are like, I like both. Like they want some showrunners, they want to know that you know the voice of the show that they're on, especially if it's a show that's been on air already, like it's been on air for a while already. They want to be sure that you know what that voice is, so they're not like teaching you, or they're not like they haven't made a mistake in hiring you, because it's like, yeah, you're a fantastic writer and your original voice is amazing, but damn, you can't write our show. Like they don't want to feel. So there are some showrunners that'll be like, I want to see a spec of or I wouldn't mind seeing a spec of my show, but for the most part, it's all original. People want to see your original work. They're not really going to ask you for a spec.
Awesome. I think there's a few other questions, but we'll save them until the end. I think we should see what's next.
Okay, go. All right, working your way up. I think I have talked a lot about this. Finding longevity once you're in. Okay, so longevity once you're in. I talk a lot about um, working while working, and here's what that means. If you're in a writer's room as an assistant, as a staff writer, as whatever, when you go home, you need to be working on your own material. You need like you can't just sit back and be like, oh, my boss will staff me, or yada. Well, staff you based on what? Do you have your samples ready? Like you need to be writing all the time, writing so that you are ready for whenever your showrunner, like my boss did when I was a writer assistant, was like, oh, send me your sample. Imagine if I didn't have a sample to send her, or if I didn't have a sample that was ready to send to her. I'd be like, I would not have gotten a manager. So my thing is this: if you want longevity, once you are in, whether it's as a writer's assistant or a staff writer, you need to be writing. You need to go home and write. That's not to say don't take a break. That's not to say don't focus on the writer's rooms that you're in. I would say this: if you're a staff writer in a room, or even a writer's assistant in the room, the first few weeks, solely focus on the room. Make sure everything's good. Make sure everyone is good. Like make sure you're doing your job well, and then you're acclimating yourself and all that. Like don't over inundate yourself with stuff. But it should get to a time where you're like, okay, time to work on my stuff. Time to fine tune my material and make sure that it's ready. So you want to be doing that. You always want to be working while you're working. Because at the end of the day, we all want to. Some just want to be staffed and continue to be staffed. But me, I'll speak for myself. I want to be show running, and the only way to show run is to continue to write material that might resonate with someone enough to buy it, and put it on television. Do you know what I mean? So in order for that to happen, you have to keep writing. and you also have to keep, you know, writing samples, because you can't have that one sample that everyone's read for the past 10 years, because then it's like everyone in the industry has seen it. It's like, okay, what else you got? So you need to be writing. Relationship building is important. I talked about networking. You should always be networking. After the writer's room, I would sometimes go to networking events, or I would go to something at the WGA that was, you know, a panel or something like that. Like networking is important. So continue to build and mine those relationships and follow up with people. How not to be a dick. Okay, this is important. If you're in the writer's room as an assistant, as a staffed person in the room, like be nice. Like be a good person to be around. Like you don't want to be like that asshole in the room that no one wants to be around, because then you will not be invited back. Like I'm not saying be all sugar and spice and everything nice. Like I'm not saying that, but like be mindful of how you are received by people. And you know, just do the work, you know. How writers are generally, how are writers, wait, how writers are generally, I don't know how I wrote this anyway. Um, I think someone asked this earlier, but like promotion is based, it's partly based on like contract. Like if it's already worked into your contract for you to go up a level, then that's one thing. If you say you're on a show and then that show ends, and then you're trying to get on another show, and then that other show, like say you're a staff writer on one show, that show ends, but sure, you have a contract for that particular show to go to story editor the next season if that show were to get a next season. So while you're waiting for that show to get a next season, say you hop on another show, that other show may also then offer you staff writer again. No, like these are the times of like we are not repeating staff writer position. We're not doing that. Like there had been this trend for like the past few years where it's like writers were repeating positions. Like we're not doing that anymore. Like you should not be doing that. Your lawyers should be working against that. Your agents should be working against that. There's no reason why you are or already working at doing one position, say staff writer. There's no reason for you to then repeat staff writer again. No, the trajectory is upward mobility. Like you should be going up to story editor, and your lawyer and or agent should be working for that. And I'll say it's been a trend, especially for writers of color, to repeat their positions. And no, we are not doing that. We are being bumped up. And that's what you should be telling your lawyers and your agents to do. And that's what they should be working towards. And they shouldn't be like, hey, they will offer you staff writer, and I think we should take it. No, why do you think we should take it? No, work to get me the story editor or the next bump, because I've already done this thing, so there's no reason for me to repeat that thing. So be mindful of that. How to deal with contract. I think I just talked about that. Make sure you're talking to your lawyer. Make sure you're telling your lawyer what you want. Open communication is important with your lawyer and your agent. You know, making them aware of like this is what I want. Please go and get this. And then if they aren't able to get that, that's a conversation to be had. But at least they knew that you guys were shooting for the stars, and like maybe you'll land on the moon type situation. Do you know what I mean? So you want to be mindful of that. Yeah, dealing with your contracts is generally like dealing with your agents and your lawyers and business affairs of that network. Finding opportunities for advancement. Yes, you want to be, when you're in a writer's room, say as a staff writer or a writer's assistant, or honestly, whatever level, you should be knowing what the other writers are doing. What are they developing? Like what, it's like, I mean, say for instance, on Insecure. Issa has like 20 shows that she's doing. Prentice has like 20 things that he's doing. Amy Aniobi has so many things. Like Grace has so many things. Like you should be asking, like, oh, what's everyone developing? And building those connections, because it's like that might be your next job. That might be the next thing that you get on. Do you know what I mean? So it's finding ways and opportunities for advancement mean that like basically finding your next gig, and you should be trying to find your next gig while you're in your current gig, because that's how you keep working, and that's how you keep from being on a 10-month year hiatus or whatever that looks like, because you weren't looking for your next job while you were in your current job. So, and be mindful of how you do that too. Don't be like, again, like I said, don't be a dick and be like, going around asking people like in the room, like, oh, I want to be on your next show, and while you're on the show that you're on, and your showrunner is looking at you crazy. Like, don't do that. But like, just be mindful of like, hey, so I'm on this show. I should probably start looking for my next thing, while also making sure that I'm focused on the show that I'm on, so that I'm not being disrespectful, or I'm not doing my job. So yeah, be mindful of that. Getting set or production experience. Okay, this is an interesting one, and I talked to you guys earlier about like broadcast versus cable versus streamers, and I mentioned like something I was going to talk about later. This is that thing. Getting set or production experience nowadays as a lower level writer, an up and coming writer, whether staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, is strange now, only because since the streamers have become so huge in terms of how it works on streaming platforms, like say Netflix. I use Netflix for example. You have the writer's room, the 20 to 24 weeks, or whatever that looks like. Then the writer's room wraps. Then the show goes into production. But by the time the writer's room wraps, you may potentially be going off into your next show, or it's like, that particular network or whoever, or streaming platform, whatever, isn't inviting you on set, because it's like that's not what they particularly do. They only upper levels or something like that, or however they want to do it, end up being paid to go to set. You don't, as a staff writer or a story editor or whatever, you don't get the set experience, because you either already moved on to another show, or that network isn't paying you to go on set when they end up going on set, partly because the writer's room has already wrapped, and it's like your job is done. So for a lot of like up and coming writers, like lower level writers, they're not really getting that set experience. So they get to the point where they become co-producers and producers, and they may have never even been on a set. So you have to kind of like, these streaming platforms have to kind of change that, have to like rework that, so that up and coming, I keep saying up and coming because I hate lower level, the term, but like lower level writers like have to be given an opportunity to be on set, especially when they're coming off of a streaming show that has their writer's room, closes out their writer's room, then goes to production. Like that format needs to kind of be reworked or changed, so that lower level writers can get set experience. Now I'm talking about streamers. Like broadcast shows tend to write while they're also on set. So you get to go to set. You get to be on set. You get to be on set for your episode and get to have that entire experience. Insecure is slightly different this year, only because of COVID. It's like limited capacity in the on set, in terms like it's just who needs to be there, so that we can protect everyone from COVID-19. So that is like slightly different. But at the same time, it's like if I were to say hit up Prentice or Easton and be like, oh, I'd really like to be on set for this episode just to see what's going on, they'd be like, yes, come on set. So you really have to have those showrunners too, and who are wanting to develop you, who are wanting to develop you not only as a writer but as a producer and someone who is gaining set experience. Like say for instance, even when I was a writer's assistant or writer's production assistant on Claws, our boss Janine would be like, come to the edit bay, like see how it's done, like give me your opinion on this cut. Like we're all giving notes on cuts. Like okay, you're writing these notes that we all have, but yet what are your notes? Do you have notes on these cuts? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there are showrunners who are going to try their best to develop you, and you want that. You want to like latch onto those individuals. And then there are times where there are showrunners who want to do that, but just by virtue of the way that particular network is, um, their production slate is set up, you may not have the opportunity to do that because you may have gone on to your next show, or they may not have allocated that particular place may not have allocated funds for a lower level writer to be on set. So, I feel that to say some things need to change, but there are fantastic showrunners and people out there who are, you know, going to look at the lower level writers and be like, you need set experience, you need to be here. I'm going to try to give you all the tools in order for you to succeed. And every boss that I've had thus far is like that. Are there any questions in this section?
Let's see. I think there were some questions that you answered after they asked them.
Okay.
So I think just the other question I'm getting about networking, which you spoke to a little, is now that we're in a COVID time, do you have any advice on how to network if there aren't any in-person events near you?
That's a good question. I feel like there are a lot of virtual spaces now to network. Okay, I Clubhouse. I'm sure some of you know about Clubhouse. Clubhouse, I'll say Clubhouse has changed a little bit now, but when I first got into Clubhouse, and I'll say like I first got on there like November, like between November, January, February, like Clubhouse was like that was the place to be to network. That was like you could find yourself in a room with Ava DuVernay, with like Tim Story. You could find yourself in a room with like all types of like celebrities and directors and writers that you admire, and in a time and in a space where you would otherwise never be able to ask that person a question or talk to that person directly. So I say Clubhouse is a great place to network with other writers. It's a great place to meet other people. Social media has always been a great place for me. Like I don't mind reaching out to people on social media to be like, hey, would you be up for a coffee? If they don't answer, they don't answer. But as long as I feel as though I have approached them respectfully about it, then I don't mind reaching out. I don't mind when people reach out to me via social media or DM me. Now, everyone, please don't start DMing me. Like, actually, no, that's not true. DM me. DM me. My thing is, give me time to respond because I am okay with being DM'd on like Twitter or Instagram, but because I've been so busy, it does take me a lot of time to get to them. Um, so if it takes me like weeks to answer or something like that, forgive me. But I'm pretty receptive to DMs, and especially if the person is respectful, doesn't come at me crazy, and genuinely, just wants to have questions or wants to know how to like, break in, other than what I have already said here. Because if you start asking me the same questions that I've already answered here, then I may not answer you, or I may say, go watch the webinar I did. And that's not out of a place of it's not out of a place of disrespect, but it's more so out of a place of like, were you listening when I spoke earlier? But yeah, like I forget your question now.
Just how to meet people in a
COVID
world.
I think people. Social media, Clubhouse is great. LinkedIn. People are still using LinkedIn. LinkedIn is great. Check out to see if there are any like virtual networking things that are happening. I know Facebook is still great, like Awesome Assistants is still great, like the different like Facebook groups that are happening. You can still socialize in that way. It's all about approaching people respectfully and being genuine. asking them questions that you can't go find easily online, and maybe that person specifically is the only person that can answer it. Yeah, just be mindful of what you're asking for, and don't just reach out to reach out. I've had people reach out to me and say things like, "Hey, uh, hey, how are you? I saw you on this thing. Like, I just want to be friends." And I'm like, no. Like, I have enough friends. I don't need people coming into my DM saying, "I just want to be friends." It's like, what? How can I help you? What would you like? And I'm always down to help. It's just like, don't come in there at being like, "I want to be friends." It's like, I mean, I'm sure we could all say it's like we have enough friends. But yeah, it's there are many ways to network virtually, and we've been doing that before the pandemic. So yeah, continue to mine Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse is great, like I said.
And might I
Finding
add, Stage
yeah.
32 is a good way to meet fellow creatives and people.
Oh yes, come on, Harrison. Yes, come on with the plug. Yes, Stage 32. Stage, Stage 32 is a fantastic place to network. And I'm sure Harrison will tell you the ways in which you can do that. And I can even say this now. I'm glad that like my mentorship initiative and Stage 32 can partner. We are partners now. And yeah, like Stage 32 is the fantastic platform. So continue to mine all the fun features that they have.
Yeah, definitely. Keep in mind we have Introduce Yourself weekend coming up as well, where you can get on our lounges and introduce yourself to everyone. People are looking during that weekend and seeing who they can find, and you can look to see who else is introducing themselves and make connections. I think this, especially right now before things are opening up in person, it's a good opportunity. May 21st to 23rd, I believe. Thanks, Kay. Kay's in the room, and she's our audience manager, our community manager, and she's better at dates than I am. But yes, I don't want to take too much time. Let's that was a great answer.
Awesome. Awesome.
And yeah.
Stay tuned to you guys. Yes, absolutely. Great place to network virtually. Yes.
Cool. I think that's my question about that specific slide. So I think we can move on.
All right. Fantastic. See here. All right. A day in the life of a writer. I think we're moving to the end of this, and I've touched on a few things already pertaining to this, but we'll just go ahead and like sum it up. So, what's the general agenda of a writer's room? Well, agenda is to create a show. But like the first few weeks of a writer's room, I'll say the first couple of weeks is like um, partly getting to know each other, but if you're really getting to work, you are putting together the season beats. Like where are we going from episode 1 to, and where do we see ourselves in the finale, so that you know what you're working towards. So you'll do a season arc, like season beats, season arc. You'll do the character arcs and where you want the character to start at the top of the season and where you want the character to end at the top of the season. You'll do that. And I'll say that once the season arc is like completed and like, written down and kind of like fine tuned and the cards up and all that, and the network and studio has approved that arc, then you move on to the episode. So usually, the pilot's already written, so the pilot is the pilot. And then you move on to episode 2, and then you'll blue sky episode 2. Blue sky is basically like throwing spaghetti at the wall. It's like let's throw everything up there that we're thinking about for this particular episode, and then we will filter through it to see what we like, what makes sense for that episode, and then we'll focus on those things, and then out of those things, start building beats for an outline. You start building the beats for the outline. You will then flesh out that outline, in terms of like, interior, exterior, whatever that is. In some cases, in some rooms, that's why I talk about like the DNA of a room. In some rooms, you'll blue sky, you'll write the beats you'll take the beats out of the blue sky, which will then become like a loose kind of like blueprint of the episode, and you'll put together a story area. Now, a story area is like a 1 to 2 page, maybe generally one to 2 page like treatment of that episode. So it'll be like, hey, this is what we would like to happen. This is like a slight arc of like what each character is like doing. That will be presented to the network in the studio. They will give their notes. They will approve it. They'll be like, okay, this is a pretty good. We like this direction. And then based off of that, you will then go on to writing your outline. You'll beat out your outline by beats, like you'll do the character beats, like what each character is doing, and then you will blend that, meaning that like, okay, well, we know what all of our characters are doing, but let's find out what order in which who is doing what and what is the relationship dynamics that are happening throughout the episode. And then you will put together the outline. Like I said earlier, the outline will then go to the assigned writer of that episode to then fill out, work on, write, put their little zhuzh on it, put their little spice on it, but still staying within the tone of the show, because that's important. And then the entire room will give them notes on the outline, and then the writer will then go back and with those notes in mind, write another draft of the outline. Once the outline has been approved by, again, the network and the studio, like they give notes, you guys, like they are contributors. Once it's approved to go on to draft, then that writer will then be approved to go write the first draft of their episode. And then that writer may hold on to their episode and continue to get notes and such, like, first is like the writer's draft of the episode, then there's like the studio draft of the episode, then there's the network draft of the episode, then there's the production draft of the episode. So I don't know if I've said this already, but writing is rewriting. You are going to be writing up until production. You will be writing when you're in production. You'll be writing until it's the final. You'll be writing until like the last shot has been shot of the show, and now it's in the editor's hands, and maybe also potentially ADR, which is like audio, whatever audio needs to that wasn't received during the filming that they want to add. They do that during ADR of the show, and then it'll go through the stages of post. So that post is different than the actual writer's room. I was talking about like the notes process and the order in which notes are given between having writer's notes, studio notes, network notes, and production draft, and so on. So that's basically like the agenda of a writer's room, is like getting all those things for every episode until you are done with the season. And you have a great, fantastic season to put out into the world. How does each role contribute? I think I talked about like the hierarchy of the room and how like each person contributes to the room. Like your lower level writers, like you want like their juicy stories and like their life experiences and things like that. Just based on the fact that like they're not coming in with the structural experience of like just knowing how to arc stories and things. So you really rely on their personal stories to kind of like flesh out your theories and like give it more of like liveliness or whatever that is. And not to say that like the other mid-level or upper level writers aren't also doing that, but like for the most part, lower level writers, like they want your stories. Let's see here. Understanding the DNA of your room. I talked about this earlier. Every room is different. The dynamics are different. The people that you're meeting are not going to be might not be the same people from your last writer's room. So you're really having to deal with people. You're having to deal with personalities, and it's important to kind of like know how people receive information, know how people like to receive their pitches. What I've heard in the past, and I think this is a good note or something great to keep in mind, is that your first couple of weeks in the room should be like, especially if like you're a lower level writer, should be to kind of like see how everyone else like just don't like sit back and be like I'm not going to do anything, but you should be like seeing how other people are pitching things. You should see like how other people, what the dynamics are in the room. Like, say if you go on to pitch something and the showrunner isn't, it's not well received, but someone else says the same pitch but does it in a different way, and the showrunner receives it well, you should be picking up on that. You should be like, oh, okay, that's how they like to receive that information. So my setup was off, but the pitch was great, but my setup was not in the way that they're used to receiving it. So you need to pay attention to those things. So take the first few weeks in the room to be like, okay, this is how this person likes to receive their pitches, or this is how this person responds to this. So be mindful of all those things. And also just, like I said earlier, it's all about forming relationships, genuine bonds with people, like actually care about their lives outside of the writer's room. When it was writers' rooms that were like in person, I would, go on walks with the other writers or something like that, or like just maybe get a drink with them after work, or if you don't drink, like go to dinner or something just to chat and like get to know them. Like you want to get to know the people that you're with, because you're truly going to be with them for at least 20 to 24 weeks and for at least 8 hours a day. And so we all know what that is. Like I like to find like my work wife, like I like to find like my work husband. I like to find like who's my person, who's gonna be my person in this room that I side eye when there's something funny happening, and I'm just kind of like, what is going on here? Like, are we on the same page? Like, you want to find like those people and build those relationships. So that's really important. Um, I wanted to talk about crediting others because I think in terms of room etiquette, that's really important. Like, say for instance, like I said earlier, I pitched something, and maybe an hour or two later, a few minutes later, whatever it is, someone else pitches the same thing. I genuinely like to be like, hey, so I'll say, oh, da, 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 and as Mike said earlier, just to dovetail on that, like I like to give credit where credit is due. So if I'm speaking to a pitch or I'm talking about something that someone had already kind of like mentioned, I will credit that person or be like, hey, yes, as so and so mentioned earlier, or yeah, great pitch, Mike. Just to add to that, or like, just giving credit where credit is due. Just it makes the other person feel good, and it makes you not seem like an asshole who wasn't paying attention to the person who had the same pitch a few minutes ago. You know what I mean? So it shows that you're paying attention, that you're listening, but also that you're being respectful to the other people that are working with you. It's just really good room etiquette. Um, Disagreeing and saying no. There are there are ways to disagree without being disrespectful. Like, I know people that will be like, that will hear a pitch, and even before the pitch ends, they'll be like, and it's like, I'm not even done with my pitch. I'm not even done saying what I was gonna say, but you're already here, like, and out making faces like I don't like it. Like, that is not like. First of all, if you're a showrunner and or creator or whoever, like if the higher levels are doing that, then let them. Like, don't go like saying I don't want you shaking your head while I'm pitching. Like, don't do that, because it's like. But like I said, when you take the first few weeks in the room to realize how people react to things, and if you see the showrunner or whoever doing that to other people, then oh, when they do it to me, it's not personal. That's just how they receive information. You know what I mean? Just be mindful of how people operate in the room, so that you're not getting your feelings hurt when certain things happen, because then you realize, oh, that's just how that person is. They'll just start shaking their head when they don't like a pitch. They'll do that to anyone. And it's not personal. It's not you. But yeah, but generally, like, just in terms of room etiquette, like, and when you are disagreeing with someone or not liking a pitch, like, let them finish what they're saying, knowing that you don't like it. But like, don't start making faces or like being like, that's not the way to go. Like, and they haven't even finished. Sometimes when they finish, you may have changed your mind by then and be like, oh, maybe I do like that. So just, yeah, be mindful of the way you disagree with folks. And honestly, I always come from a place of like being respectful. And the thing is too, I'm saying all this, but I have been guilty of some of this too. So I'm like saying some of this to myself, where I've had to check myself and be like, okay, Mike, your face is not helping you here. There have been instances where I've had to check myself and check my facial expression, and be like, and Zoom now more than ever helps you with that because you're looking at your own screen like, oh wait, Mike, fix your face. So that helps. But yeah, genuinely, or what am I trying to say? Generally, you want to be careful of how you're being received or how other people are receiving you, and just being respectful of the space. And that is, just a day in the life of a writer's room. What to do and what not to do in room etiquette. Are there any questions?
That's awesome. One quick question. I wasn't making that face at all, by the way. I think this has all been great. Um, Lynn wants to know what are the daily hours like when you're writing for a show, and do you work on weekends too?
That's a good question. Weekends, generally no. Generally, no one's working on weekends. Generally, unless you're on episode or you've been asked specifically by the showrunner to work on this thing, like your outline or work on whatever after work, then yeah, I mean it's your job. Like do that. But for the most part, people aren't like working on weekends unless they're working on their own stuff, which you should be. You all should be working on your own material when you're not in the writer's room. But yeah, and in terms of hours, I talked about the DNA of a writer's room. Like it varies. Like there are some writers, like say for instance, I'll say the writers that have children or the showrunners that have children are more likely than not to be like, this room needs to end at 6 o'clock because I need to get home to my family. Or they'll be like, it's a hard out at 6. We're working from like 9 p.m. to 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. to 6. What am I saying? What am I saying? 9 a.m. to 6 a.m. 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and it's a hard out at 6 p.m. because they want to get home to their families. Like they don't want to be there all night. So hours vary depending on the type of showrunner you have, depending on the type of show that you're on, depending on the what is required of that show. Like say if you're on broadcast or something and it's like you're in the room and you're shooting, like that could be crazy. So sometimes the hours can be crazy because it honestly it is. I liken broadcast TV to being like the Olympics of of writing, because you have to be able to write fast. You have to be able to work long hours. Like it's like the athletes of like the Olympics of writing. They're just having to do so much with so little time because people are relying on you to get things out, especially when you're in production at the same time the writer's room is happening. So answer to that question is the hours vary. Do people generally work on weekends? No. Do people generally work, after their working hours? Yes and no, depending on like if someone is on episode, and in which case, yes, write your episode or write your outline and have your work done. But for the most part, no, a lot of the work is done in the room. And when it's not being done in the room, it's because you are currently on episode and are writing your episode.
Awesome. So you kind of already touched on this, but someone wants to know, does everyone go off and write on their own, or they all write in the same room? So how much of the actual writing is done in the room versus on your own when you're on episode?
Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes group writing takes place, in which case group writing is when the entire room, opens up final draft on a TV screen and the assistant is like typing as everyone is kind of like working off the outline and like building the script together. When that's not happening and a writer is being given their assigned episode to go write, then yeah, they're not in the room. They're off. They have to go off and write their episode. There have been cases when a writer is required to be in the writer's room pitching on episodes and then go home and then work on their episode. That's like I said, based on the DNA room. That's based on circumstances. That's circumstantial based on like what is required of that person or of that room, because of whatever pressure is being put upon them to get things done. Generally, more often than not, the writer who's assigned to their episode leaves the room and goes off to write their episode.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I think that's good for now.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. I think we're done. We look at you guys.
Oh
We
my
like
gosh.
like it's been so nice chatting with. Well, it's been so nice leading this webinar for you guys. It's fantastic. I will take any questions that you have. And for like, what time is it? I can't see the time.
It's 3 o'clock.
It's 3 o'clock. Okay, I have time to take questions. I don't have any meetings this afternoon. I know Harrison's not going to be like, okay, let's have 3 hours of questions. And I also would not like 3 hours of questions, but I do have time to take as many questions as Harrison will allow. So please,
Yeah.
please shoot away.
First, let me just say, Mike, that was, I can't believe how chock full of just like wisdom and information that was. I think you talk in a way that just feels very nonchalant, but that wasn't nonchalant. You had so much in there. And I think just so much, not just context, but like knowledge and just perspective. And I think that was fantastic. So thank you so much for doing all of that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And a lot of people have been asking questions. We've been answering a lot of questions throughout. If anyone has any more questions to ask, you can do so through the questions box of your GoToWebinar toolbar. Or if we want to have fun, if anyone wants to ask a question live with their microphone, we can do that too. You can press your hand button on your toolbar
Oh my
to
God,
raise your hand,
yes.
and then we'll
I
see if we can get people to. Oh my gosh, we got a lot of hands up. Okay, we're not gonna be able to get through everyone. I'm sorry, everyone, but we will do our best, and I'll also get some of the questions that we had going on so far. Let's see. Alexandra, I think you've had your hand up for a while or had a question for a while. I'm going to unmute you, and if you can unmute yourself on your end, you can ask your question.
Yes, I think earlier when we were talking about writers' rooms, my question got kind of confusing. What I was asking is the difference in a typical working week in a comedy room versus a drama room during the season. Like, what's the difference in how they work? Not just the dynamics, but just the writing style, what happens on set and stuff like that.
Okay. Um, the writing style isn't particularly different. Like the structure that I mentioned in terms of like, season arc, then blue sky, then story area, then outline, then episode. That structure is the same whether it's comedy or drama. Now, in terms of the hours that you're working, the hours can vary, and the hours can vary based on whether or not that is a cable show or that is a broadcast show. Because generally, a broadcast show, they are writing while they are also shooting. So those hours can tend to get crazy only because they have to turn out episodes. And then they generally get like 22 to 23 episodes. Imagine writing like a cable comedy show like Insecure, which will mostly be in a room and then go into production, is different than a comedy show on ABC, which is 22 episodes, because Insecure is only 10. And we'll start shooting while you're also, for the most part, we'll start shooting while you're also writing. So like the hours are different. The hours in broadcast can sometimes be like breakneck hours, just depending on like the pressure that might be put on you to get things done. But yeah, like, is that answering your question, or am I still confused? Like, please tell me.
No, that's actually answering my question. I'm a screenwriting student at the Los Angeles Film School, so a lot of the questions can answer, but sometimes they don't or they confuse me. So I thought I would ask someone who's recently been in a writer's room.
Okay, cool. I hope I was able to answer that properly. But yeah, I'd say that like, the hours are longer generally if you are in a broadcast comedy room and if that room is also in production of the show, because then it's like you're having to turn out like it's 22 episodes. Like think about like a broadcast comedy room that has 22 episodes and a cable comedy room that only has 10. And they both sometimes have the same amount of time, like in terms of weeks of being in the room to do that. So it's just you have to be able to work at a breakneck pace sometimes when it comes to broadcast. That's why I haven't done a broadcast show yet, and I don't know if I plan to do a broadcast show. Oh, let me not speak that into existence for myself because I might want to like sell broadcast shows. So let me not say that. But the pace, right? The pace is different. Like it's the Olympics.
Awesome.
What about for a streaming, like Netflix or Hulu?
It's different. It's like, cause like I said earlier, like Netflix, it's like you go write all the episodes, and then once all the episodes are written, then you go shoot it. So it's different. The hours are normal. Usually, not crazy, and like you have time to do stuff because there's time allocated to the writers' room. Once the writers' room is over, generally for most shows that I've seen on Netflix, then production starts. So it's not as crazy as broadcast, or even sometimes not as crazy as cable.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexandra. Let's see if we can get to a few more questions. There's a few more hands raised, but I do want to ask one that's been coming up a lot in the questions box, which is things are changing a lot with COVID, and with COVID kind of coming to an end, and we're in a time right now where people can work on a show on East Coast or even somewhere in different country and not be in LA. Do you have a sense of if that's going to be changing soon? Is it important to live in LA now? Or is there still possibilities to work from wherever you are?
Y'all, LA is still the hub. You want to be a writer, you want to be in a room, you have to be in LA. The COVID, the pandemic, yes, has been unfortunate, and in some cases has been good for people because they can work from wherever. But the way things are opening up now, and the way like Austin Film Festival invited me to be a panelist, and I thought, oh, okay, sure, virtual, cool, I'll be a panelist. No, it's going to be in person this year. Austin Film Festival is going to be in person this year. So it's kind of like things are opening back up. Things are, I don't like to say normal because I mean, it's not going back to normal per se, but like things are opening up. Things are getting back to a comfortable space where people are going to be more comfortable being in each other's space. Our writer's room is going to be, in person this year. I don't know about that. Maybe 2022. Or, there'll be a hybrid by the fall or something where it's like half in person, half on Zoom or something. I'm not sure. I do know that when Ginny and Georgia comes back, that'll be virtual. But it's not, virtual rooms are not gonna last. It'll either end up being some form of a hybrid in the future or going fully back to being in person.
Awesome.
But what I will say is showrunners should entertain or should consider writers that live somewhere else because Zoom has been so efficient. Like there's no reason why an entire room can be in person and one person put them up on the TV and they're somewhere else. But that's me personally. That's not. I don't know if showrunners are thinking about that like that. But yeah, it's gonna go back to being in person, and LA is still the hub of entertainment where you need to be as a writer.
That's good to know. I have a hand raised here from Ranjiv. Ranjiv, can you can ask your question?
Hey, Mike. This is Ranjiv, and I learned a ton. Thank you so much. But I had a question. I follow you on Instagram, and how are you able to stay so muscular during the pandemic? And okay, no, that's a joke. You don't have to actually answer that. My actual question, I mean, if you want to answer that, you can, but my actual question is about the trends of the post-pandemic. Like in terms of genre, do you think there's going to be any major shifts in genre or, the types of stories that are being told?
Oh, I'm sorry. You broke up a little bit.
Okay. So the second part was, in terms of genre in the post-pandemic landscape, what do you predict is going to be, trendy? What's going to be in? If you're, bold enough to make a prediction on that.
And Ranjiv, can you mute yourself when because there's a little echoes when Mike answers?
Oh,
okay,
me?
Sure.
I can mute myself.
Yeah,
Me?
I'll mute myself.
No, Ranjiv.
Okay. Well, first part of your question, I got fit during the pandemic. I didn't like. It wasn't a question of how do you stay fit during the pandemic. I got during the pandemic, and it only came out of a place of like, okay, by last June I was like 105 pounds, and that's the biggest I've ever been, and I was very kind of like depressed, and I needed to find my peace. I was dealing with like personal things, personal traumas, and things like that, and a breakup. And I needed to find an outlet to release some endorphins and, to find my peace. So working out really helped me with that. So that is accounts for the the body. Your question in terms of the genres. I First of all, I want to address where your question might be coming from, because if you are putting yourself in a situation to attempt to forecast what networks and production companies and executives might be looking for, you're already doing yourself a disservice, because you shouldn't be writing towards trends. You should be writing what is in your heart to write, and then you, by virtue of writing what is in your heart to write, create the next trend. Like, I think of like, how long did it take Stranger Things to get bought, and then Stranger Things happened, and next thing you know, everyone's looking for Stranger Things when they weren't checking for it before. Like, Pose became major. For years, no one was checking for Pose, and now Pose is like, oh, now we want shows about this. It's like, you should be the engine that creates the trend, not you trying to dictate what the trend might be and writing towards the trend, if that makes sense. But to answer your question, I don't know. I mean, a lot of like post-apocalyptic stuff, I'm sure. I think that a lot of like just feel-good comedies are coming up, because a lot of like kind of like escapist content, like a lot of fantasy, a lot of anything with like um, anything that's like very like diverse, or new stories that we haven't heard before. Like, we often talk about how certain like diversity, well, not diversity groups, or certain ethnicities aren't like monolithic, like, or certain like black people aren't monolithic, like Asian people aren't monolithic, um, you know it's that thing of like telling stories that we've never heard before, I think, is where the trend is going. And just exposing more people to different cultures and doing it in a way that feels universal is the trend that we're going towards. So I say all that to say is, write the show that is in your heart to write the thing that you have not seen that is uniquely from you, and the industry will move to make room for it.
Okay, awesome. That's great advice, Mike. Yeah, I have to create the trend rather than following it. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for that.
No problem. Thank you. Great questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ranjiv. I appreciate the question too. And it was a great answer. Let's do a few more questions. This is a good one from Julia. She said, "Hi, this was so wonderful. Thanks, Mike. I have a quick question. Who should read your writing samples? What's the best way to workshop them so they're ready for managers or showrunners, etc.?"
Okay. That's a good question. I like a mix of people to read my samples. Like, and here's what I mean by a mix of people. I will send my script to friends who are not writers, and I will send my scripts to friends that are working writers in the business. Of course, I'll send my script to my manager, my agent. Well, more so my manager, because your manager is meant to develop you. I'll send my scripts to my manager to be like, what notes, get notes from them. The part of the reason I like to send my scripts to friends that aren't writers is because they can catch those things, whether or not it's like structure, whether or not they are kind of they are seeing it just from like a viewer's perspective. Like, they're just like, their thing is like, did I enjoy reading this? Did I like this? Did I resonate with these characters as an audience member? Like, forget structure. Like, my friends who are writers can like talk to me about structure, but if if I have friends who aren't in the business who are reading my script who are like, I don't really like this character. Like, I want to talk to them about why they didn't particularly like that character. Maybe as a writer, I don't want the audience to like that character, but I do want the audience to understand that character and understand why they don't like that character. So there are like certain things that you can ask your friends who aren't writers that you generally wouldn't be able to ask your friends who are writers because they're looking at it at such a technical point of view that you want someone to with a fresh take to be like, I don't know if I like this person. Even if they don't have the language to articulate why, at least you know, okay, there's something I need to work on with this character or this person or this arc because there's something about it that's not resonating with someone, with people, and I want it to resonate. So yeah, I would say always give your scripts to your samples to friends who aren't writers. Give it to friends who are writers and who know structure and all the technical things that go along with being a writer, and your manager.
Awesome. I have a hand raised here from Kasturi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you're, can you unmute your microphone and then ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. First of all, thank you so much, Mike, for everything that you've given us here. Some great, valuable stuff. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Harrison, as well. My question is, so I've noticed a trend, like talking to like writers that I know, where a lot of times they'll get a set amount of weeks to finish a episode or a script, and a lot of times they'll stretch the weeks. So basically, they don't put everything into the days that are leading up to them working together. They kind of stretch it out to make sure that they get all of those weeks. I didn't know if that was a common practice, is something that I should expect, or if that's something that maybe just particular individuals do. But I've heard it from more than one writer that they do that, so I wasn't sure 100%
Oh
about
my
that.
God. Okay, so they try to extend the amount of time they need to get the work done in order to get additional weeks of pay.
No, so basically what will happen is the network will give them, let's say, 20 weeks. You have 20 weeks to get these episodes done, right? And
Okay,
and
20, okay.
yeah, and instead of finishing them, sometimes you have great writers and they can finish them in maybe 6 of those weeks, but they're like, we're not going to finish in 6 weeks when we've been given 20 weeks, so we're going to stretch them out. So they kind of will just give little bits during the writing rooms and not really give everything in order to get the whole 20 weeks. And I don't know if that was a common practice or if that's something that's just particulars, like specific.
That's a good question. I have never, in the rooms that I've been in, I haven't seen that. In the cases, in the case, here's what I'll say about that though. I will say that there are instances where, say, you have finished an outline, or say, you know that you're done with this outline, and maybe the network or studio is expecting to see that outline in like a week, but you've already done it. You may be like, well, let's hold on to it. Like, let's continue to like read this and give notes on it because they're expecting it in a week. We finished it in a week, but we also don't want to give the expectation of like we can finish things early.
Yeah.
So like, but I've never seen it to the level of like we got done with these episodes in 6 weeks and we have 15. I've never seen that. I've never, you know what I mean? So usually it's like we need more time, and that's not out of a place of being a good writer or not. It's just by virtue of like just that room and like wanting to provide the best season possible. So yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's mostly in the sitcoms that I've seen it happen with different people, but I didn't know if it were something that I should expect going in, or if it's something that's isolated. It's not very common.
Yeah, you shouldn't expect it. I don't think that's common. Generally it's like you're given a 20 weeks or 24 weeks in a room to get a season done, and usually that is that is the time you need to get the season done. Even for like a comedy, it's like I kudos to whatever room got a season done in 6 weeks. Like I've never heard that before, but like kudos to them if they were able to do that and like chill and just chill for the rest of the time. We would all love to just chill for the rest of the time, and I definitely agree with them being like, okay, let's not give them the season because we're done and we want to get paid for these remaining weeks. But usually just based on like the structure of like, because usually a showrunner will sit down and structure their weeks and be like, okay, and they'll put together like due dates and deadlines.
Yeah.
So based on that, that's why I'm saying for the most part that's not going to happen, because usually a showrunner will be like, okay, we have 20 weeks. These are the deadlines for each of our episodes, each of our outlines, each of our first draft, second draft, so on and so on.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Let's do like 1 or 2 more questions before we have to go. This is a good one from Kima, who asked, is the industry welcoming to writers over 40 who are not new to filmmaking or writing, but new to Hollywood's writers' rooms? It seems like producers and shows focus on recruiting 20 and 30-year-old writers.
That's a good question. One of my mentees is almost 40, close to 40, fabulously and looking fabulous. And that's a good question. When we talk about diversity, we also need to talk about like age discrimination. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just because, and the thing is too, just because you're older doesn't mean that you don't have a wealth of information to impart or have or are a good writer. You know what I mean? So what I will say is in the past couple of years, I have seen more lower level writers and new staff writers or so on that are older be put in rooms. So I think the industry is making a change and recognizing that there are older individuals who are having their second act in life and their third act in life who are coming into the entertainment writing space that deserve just as much of an opportunity as these 20-somethings coming into that space. So I have seen a change, and older writers, please continue to keep writing, continue to strive to be in these rooms, because there are rooms that are looking for you.
Awesome. Honestly, I think this is a good place to start wrapping things up. I think we're at a good stopping point. And I got to a lot of questions. Sorry for everyone's questions I didn't get to. What I will say is, oh no, I just lost the link. If anyone wants to keep the conversation going, we like that here at Stage 32, and I'm going to give you all a link to do that, where we have a lounge at Stage 32, and if you want to contribute to this post, which I'm putting right here in the chat, and keep the conversation going, maybe ask the questions to everyone that you couldn't get in, or if you think of something later, feel free to join this post and join Stage 32's community of people and talk about this. And before I get going, first off, Mike, this was so fantastic. Thank you so much for all of this and for giving so much of your time and so much of your perspective. If anyone else has any thoughts or well wishes for Mike before we go, you can put them in the questions box and I'll read them out loud. And then Mike, we'd like to end these with just kind of some last words of encouragement. You've already given a whole lot, but do you have any like last kind of things to say to anyone who's really hoping to get into a writer's room now, or trying to figure out what to do next and are figuring out their future?
Absolutely. I will say to you what one of my mentors and my past bosses always said to me, who was Janine Sherman-Berrois, who I adore, always said, keep writing. Like, it didn't matter what success had just happened in my life. It didn't matter, like, what was going on or the highs and lows. It was keep writing. So my advice to all of you is to keep writing, because even when you get that shot and you're in the writer's room, like, it's about the next thing. Or what's the next thing? So you have to keep writing. You know what I mean? And also, even before getting into a writer's room, sometimes, and this happened to me, you are so hungry to be in a room that it's like and starts to feel like you're never going to get there, you're going to get there. You're going to get there. It's going to be amazing. You're going to, you know, look back at a time when you weren't in a room and be like, wow, like I, you know, made it. Or like, you know, as long as you continue to um, work with intention, network with intention, speak what you want into existence. I'm a big believer in manifesting things. I'm also a big believer in telling people what I want, and allowing them to not necessarily help me, but like being truthful about the things that I want and allowing the universe to use people to help me get there. So you know, just be mindful of what you want and how you intend to kind of get it, and allow yourself the grace to and the time to get there, because it'll happen. Like if this is what you want to do and this is the only thing that you want to do, keep working at it and you will get there. So yeah, those are my final words for all of you.
Those are really great final words. I think that's a really nice way to put it, and really hopeful. And I think the positive reviews are flying in. I heard, thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Incredibly helpful and informative and hopeful. Thanks so much. So much fantastic advice. And a lot of my questions were answered in such a sincere yet approachable manner. This has been immeasurably helpful and insightful. Brenda said, you did an awesome job, and thanks for such a positive message for us older writers. I've been at this since the caveman invented fire.
Yeah.
There's a lot more. I can't keep up with all of this, but yes, Sarah said, thank you for encouraging us not only to become better writers, but also to become better, genuine human beings. Wow, that's very nice, Sarah. Yes, thank you, Mike. This was so cool. Thanks for giving so much of your time, and thanks everyone else for being here. We're glad you're here. Stick around, stay involved with Stage 32. We'll see you at the next webinar, and have a great rest of your week and weekend.
Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.